Hey gang, Elizabeth with Dandysoap channel. I am doing, you can see these are turnip greens and they are fresh picked, and I have my great big stainless steel pot. So basically I'm going to wash off my greens, I'm going to cut them and place them in the pot and fill this with water and put it on the stove to cook my cream. Basically you are cooking them to get the bitter off. So the first part of the cook down will be to basically clean and sanitize them and pour off the water, and then clean water will be placed in there and finish up the cooking process. So stay tuned and you'll see what happens next. Don't these look good? They're cooking down, and when the hot water hits them they just wilt and they start cooking down. Okay, so now that the greens are cooked down, I'm straining them off, place them into the jars. Okay, so what we're doing here is where we strain the greens from out of the cook pot. We're now re-straining them across the colander to see to it that any dirty water that was in there before is drained out. Now we add half a teaspoon of salt to each pint. This will help with preserving our greens. Now we'll add boiling hot water to each jar, and the water will go to the edge of the rim of the jar. And make sure you pour your water slowly in case your jars are cool. You really need to have your jars hot, or at least at room temperature, before adding the boiling water to each jar. And that will help the jar to acclimate, so you have less chance of rupture or busting your jar. And this is just a take it easy, simple process. Just go slow and take your time. And during that time, you can have your pressure canner heating up its water, and then it will be prepared to acclimate with the same temperature, and then come to a rolling boil with the lid on. So this bubble bursting instrument, see how we're sliding it down the edge, down the side of the jar, and that just helps to settle everything. And at this point you can see how the water is lowering in the jar because now all the space is being filled. So you'll just add a little bit more water to make sure that your greens are covered basically, and that it's no further than the rim here of your jar. And that's important because to keep from drying out your turnip greens, you want plenty of water in there, and sometimes the pressure can actually allow some of the water to escape, or headspace, because the air will be pressured out during the canning process. And then tap down on them. You do not want to pack greens. You want them placed in there loosely. So you don't pack them. You're just moving things around to make sure that there's no air pockets so your jars don't rupture and burst. And it's just a simple process. And then you see how the water is settling. You'll just add more water before you wipe your jar and cap it. This is full of hot contents, and to be extremely careful, and that's why it's so important to pour your boiling water slowly over these greens. Tap them out, and if you have to, make sure you have your kitchen towel to hold to your jars while you're doing this, and then that helps aid you and keep you safe. So now we're getting excited because now we're getting ready to clean the top of our jars and put our lids and rings on and place them in the canner. And see how we're just wiping around the outer edges around the ring. Make sure there's no leaves of the greens or anything around that. Any salt or anything that could have spilt over, you want to clean that. Be sure to rinse your cloth often in hot water. Okay, so now we're wiping the top edge of the jar, and that prepares it for the lid and the ring, and it gives it a better seal. A little tack there. And then just place your lid and ring on, and then we're going to place these down into the pressure canner. And depending on the size of your pressure canner will determine how many pints it can hold at a time. And just hand tight, just until your fingers stop. The water will begin rising as you put in that weight of those jars. My tongs, my jar tongs, and that makes putting them in and getting them out much easier. And as you see, there's water coming up around the edges. Most instructions will tell you to have at least an inch of water over your jars, covering your jars. And believe it or not, that does actually help speed up your canner sealing up and the canning process starting. So when you have low water in your canner, you chance bursting your jars, as well as taking forever for your jiggler to begin jiggling. So having that right level of water is a big aid. So if you see that your water is low, if you pre-boiled your water in, say, a water pitcher like this, you can pour that water in there and add it and help level out your water content for your canner. And then that will just speed that process up. See how that water's coming up over the jars? And that's what you want. So we've got our water level correct, and now it's time to put on the lid of the pressure canner. So this is where the old saying comes from. Patience is a virtue. So just be very patient. Allow the water temperature to acclimate and rise to a boiling point with all the jars in there and everything at the same temperature, building up. And then you will see steam coming up out of this point. And also your pressure sealer will rise, and it'll come up and seal this off once it's hot enough and enough steam and pressure has built up inside of the canner. And that will be your cue to put your jiggler on. The difference between 5, 10, and 15 pounds of weight is you have your jiggler, and the jiggler itself is 5 pounds. And then each one of these rings that slide on there are an additional 5 pounds. So if your canning recipe calls for 5 pounds of pressure, you would only use the main jiggler. If it calls for 10 pounds of pressure, you would add one of the weights on, thus being 10 pounds of pressure that this jiggler will hold down. And then if it's calling for 15, you would add this jiggler, this weight onto the jiggler. So since we only need 10 pounds on our greens, I will remove one, and that will be the jiggler and one weight. Now some helpful hints while I'm waiting on the pressure to build up. See, when you have lids that are rusty like this, or even rings that are rusty, depending on how bad that rust is, some vegetables like pickles with the vinegar will speed this process up. But as you can see, it looks perfect here. But this is where you have to pay attention, is the inside of that ring. And that ring could be scrubbed down and potentially used. But this one is really deteriorated. And for fear of rupture or not getting a good seal after letting these things process inside a closed canner that you cannot see what's going on, I decided against using any of this. And these have gotten and received brand new lids and rings. You should always use brand new lids and rings whenever possible. At least new flats, as they may call them, or lids. And then the rings a lot of times can be reused. You can see how bad rusty these are. But if you were looking at this underside, they look very good and new. So if you feel like you could be successful in using these and being able to get them on and off the jar without compromise, then a lot of people like myself do use them. But I would have to be in dire straits and not have any lids and rings before I would use those, simply because I fear compromise, and I fear it's in a canner for an hour and 10 minutes and I take it out and my jars aren't sealed. I'm going to be pretty upset. And of course, if you have a flat or a lid that even remotely looks like this, do not, under any circumstances, use it, because that has now deteriorated that coating. And contrary to the seal looks good, but that is eaten away, and you don't want rust in your food. Okay guys, you see what's happening here where that's building up pressure and steam? Okay, see how it's rising up? Alright, now it's sealed off. Yeehaw! This is the fun thing. This is when we get to put our jiggler on. Because now we got our jig that is risen, and this is our jiggler. So now that the jig has built up pressure, you see this continuous pattern of steam rising from off of your pressure canner? That's what you want, that good flow. And you'll put your jiggler on. Just be careful not to touch the pot, because it's hot. Now once this builds up, and sometimes this could take 10-15 minutes before it builds up enough pressure, and this will start jigging, and I'll show you that as soon as it builds up enough to start jigging. The main thing is once this closes off and you got that continuous stream of steam, then introduce your jiggler. So your jig's closed, introduce your jiggler to the stream of steam to hold the, and that's the weight it's going to sit on there. And then once it builds up that pressure, it's going to start singing, as we call it. That's what the South calls it. We call it singing because it'll start jigging like crazy. During the waiting period, you'll notice that you'll see a little bit of condensation trying to come out from around your jiggler, and that's just where it's preparing and getting ready to build up enough pressure to start jiggling. And you'll hear all kinds of boiling going on inside with the jars. And this is when we clean up. And we can put everything up and get it out of our way so that when our jars are done, we can pull them out. Okay, we've got jiggling. Here's what we want. And she'll get even more vigorous as she builds up pressure. And then like a constant, vigorous jig. Because you really want her dancing. And she's not even dancing as much as I want her to. But once she does, and now that she is dancing, this is when you set your timer. This is when you go ahead and you program your timer so that you can relax and do what you got to do. Let her go. And just keep an eye on her and go about your daily life. And you'll probably want to entertain yourself in a separate room because it's loud. And you're going to hear that for an hour and 10 minutes on green. Now, as I would advise anybody, don't just take my word for it. It's really, really important that you purchase yourself the Blue Book. This is the famous Ball Blue Book. And if it's predated before 1995, Ball Canning Company advises you to replace it because they have tested continuously and they've found multiple discretions and changing issues based on how we raise our food now and how that food needs to be processed. So it's not just them trying to get you to buy a new book. It is from their actual lab and their testing advising you that if you have a ball canning book that was issued and published prior to 1995, to replace it because the rules have changed and the necessities and the pressure and the amount of time to can your food has changed. So once again, this is my ball canning book. This is my reference to process my greens, and it will tell you all the way down to cutting, preparation, and what you need to do in order to prepare your greens. So there you go. And it tells you how much pressure and how long a time. So just be aware of that. Don't just take my word for it. Even though I'm showing you some good habits and some things to do, make sure you purchase a Ball Blue Book for your own security and read it and make sure you look it up. You can also visit their website if you question or not sure or you have an older book, and you can look them up and see what they recommend now. Now this is when that jig is seriously dancing, and this is what you want. It is just unstoppable jigging. And that's what we're looking for. It's awesome. Okay, so once you've turned off your canner, one thing that you can do, and you have to do this very slow, and you can use like the handle of your tongs and place it just under the edge of your jig to release the pressure. But you have to do this slowly. Don't do it quickly because it can be dangerous, and if it releases pressure too quickly, it can actually rupture your glass jars inside. And this is only if you need to quickly change out your canner and put more additional food in there to be processed and pressure canned. So otherwise, just leave it till it cools down on its own, and it'll release the pressure on its own. And then once this has failed, once this jig goes down, and if it's done released enough pressure and it drops down, you are clear and safe to remove the lid from off of your pressure canner. Don't remove that lid until this jig falls. When that jig falls and it's smooth and flat and even with the surface, then and only then has the pressure released enough that you can safely remove your lid from off of your canner. So this is where you'll take your tongs and you'll remove your jars and listen for that distinct pop. The cool air is hitting them, or cooler than the environment they're in, so you're hearing them seal. And one thing that's very, very important is you never want to set that hot jar straight down on your countertop or any surface for two reasons. One, it will flat remove and burn and scald and mark up your counter. Number two, if it's cooler than that jar, it could rupture your jar, and you just did all this work for nothing if you do that. So just gently remove them using your tongs and lift them out. And always make sure that you have a very well cushioned surface. This dry mat is perfect for this because it has a cushioned area, and you can leave them undisturbed until all of them seal and cool off. Sometimes you may cover them with a towel. That's for your protection so no one bumps into them. And sometimes the additional insulation of those jars ensures that the other ones will seal. Sometimes the book will actually tell you to set them so much distance apart from each other. And then some will say otherwise. But from my southern background and coming up, and because you do have to, this is your food, this is your safety, your pantry and storage, and your food consumption throughout the coming year. And you don't want anything to happen to it or anything to perish, so you take no chances. You actually make sure that they stay cumbersome together and they comfort one another, and make sure that they seal, and you just protect these. This is gold. In the South, this is gold. True, balanced, healthy, unadulterated, unpesticide nutrition. And you know where it came from. You picked it with your own hands. You raised it in your own fields. So this is security for us. And this is our food. So it's very, very important. So we protect it in every way possible. So at this time, you might want to drape a towel over it. But we are done. This is the end of the canning of our beautiful turnip and mustard greens. And now you hear that beautiful pop. Isn't it gorgeous? Once these have cooled down, you'll check and make sure that all the seals are sealed, that they're down. There's no bouncy. And these have all sealed just while I was getting them out that quick, because they were pressure canned, and the difference in the air temperature has sealed up the jars. So once these completely cool down, I recommend that you use an adhesive label, or you can make some pretty printables. So you want to put the name of the food, the month you canned it, and the year in which you canned it in. And so you guys, I hope you enjoyed canning turnip and mustard greens with me, and I hope that maybe it might answer some questions for you, or might make you brave enough to take on this in the future. Until the next DIY, this is Elizabeth. Please hit the thumbs up and hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Until the next DIY, this is Elizabeth signing off. See you then. Bye.